Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Spencer Jones. He's the founder and CTO of Lineaus. Spencer, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Nick. It's a pleasure to be with you.
As I always do, always helpful to hear a little bit about the background of the individual before we get into that, the details. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you arrived at this role.
Sure. So I grew up in Central Arkansas, grew up in a healthcare household and went to school to be a registered nurse. So I kind of knew I was going to be in healthcare pretty much my entire life. It felt like finished nursing school. And my plan was to go into anesthesia school, but I had only worked as a registered nurse for about a year whenever I kind of kept experiencing problems firsthand at the bedside during direct patient care, and just became really frustrated with kind of some of the devices that I was being forced to use and kind of the lack of different device options, or it just felt like there was a huge kind of issue with the supplies that nurses had. And so from that, I ended up patenting one medical device and then acquiring a patent for another medical device. And I'd say kind of those items really coincided with me being able to participate in business accelerators, which I can't speak enough about those programs. They were really critical to kind of giving me that dangerous amount of knowledge, right, to be a little bit entrepreneurial, right? Because as a nurse, I had no training, no business training, entrepreneurial experience, et cetera. But these accelerator programs, and I'll just give a 10-second on it. Typically, these programs, you'll take in 4 or 5 companies. They'll provide a small amount of seed capital as an investment. Maybe it's $20,000 or $50,000. And then it's 13 weeks of intense mentorship, boot camp style business training. And so I was able to participate in 2 of those within basically 1 calendar year, took 2 separate devices through 2 separate programs. And coming out of that, that was really what supplanted me as okay, I'm going to be an entrepreneur now. I'm going to be an executive at this company, this startup, access to capital. I already mentioned the knowledge, the networks and the mentorship. So I'll say those programs are kind of a really big catalyst for what got me from kind of an innovative thinking nurse to, someone building a product, building a company, building a business.
So it's not typical for nurses to do what you've done. There must have been something that happened as part of this process. I mean, you talk about the devices and lack of choice, but what was it that really sort of pushed you over the edge? Is it?
I would say it was just a lack of good answers to seemingly obvious questions. I'll give the example. It was, if a patient has an IV in their arm, and you need a blood sample, you have to stab them in their other arm. And I remember it was one of my earlier shifts as a nurse, and my nurse preceptor that was still training me said, "Hey, go draw blood on this patient." I said, "Can I not get it from their existing IV?" She said, "No." And I said, why not? And there was not a good answer, and the deeper I dug into it, it just seemed like either, there was kind of, perverse market incentive from the big players to do it, or just no one had the kind of wherewithal. Some of these large corporations, they can get so far removed from the bedside that they don't see acute problems that can be solved with minor device changes sometimes. So I would say it was just, that's to tie a bow on that. It was just, I continually was seeing horrible complications be the norm, right? So 46% of all peripheral IVs will fail before their intended end of use. So it's almost half of them are having a preventable complication occur. And it's just accepted, right? If your ventilator failed 46% of the time, or your car didn't start,
your car failed. Every other trip that you take, it fails.
Yeah. And if you think about it, these devices, these vascular access devices, are vital lifelines. Pain medication, antibiotics, chemotherapy, you name it. They're great. They have to be in place for diagnostics, fluoroscopy procedures, et cetera. It was the failure rate and not having good answers to easy questions, to me, I think, is what pushed me to say there's room for improvement here. And we found some, 2 kind of device niches that we're trying to exploit that opportunity and get better products to frontline healthcare workers.
So, I recognize that, and that's certainly part of my sort of makeup, but there's
there's a part of me that says that there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of other clinical professionals who must have experienced that, but didn't have the trigger or didn't get to the next step, which was what can I do and how can I solve it? How did you find that pathway? Because to me, that's not easy typically, particularly given that you go into this program for clinical training, whatever it happens to be, in your case as a nurse, but there's nothing in there that says, hey, here's some out of the box thinking, which is essentially what you're describing, right?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's a great point. And I'd say I'm partially still on that journey of figuring out, how to make the change or why I'm making the change. But, I would say one of the real things that kind of pushed me was finally getting some mentors around me that said, you can do this, and kind of, showed me a path. And then, people that, cause a lot of, sometimes in organizations, an entrepreneurial spirit is not met with open arms, right? Some organizations it is, some organizations it's not. When you're a nurse, you're basically a task manager where you're just knocking out task after task, patient after patient. This person needs pain meds. This person wants peanut butter crackers. This person needs a blanket. And there's not a whole lot of thought about kind of expanding your career in a non-clinical way, right? You can get certifications and there's always that push, but it's just the entrepreneurial mindset of thinking is not something that's really, you see a lot in the nursing industry, kind of writ large. But yeah, I'd say the main thing that pushed me into kind of taking the leap of faith was getting enough smart people around me and having them provide me with resources and confidence and training. And then really the leap of faith, and it comes down to one week, I'd say, in my life where I was still working full-time as a registered nurse during the night shift. And I got the opportunity to move to Memphis, and it was going to be a full-time program. So I had to actually physically relocate there for 4 months. And I went to my employer at the time out of Little Rock, and I had been very transparent with them the whole time, which I would highly recommend that any entrepreneur that has a full-time job and is exploring or moonlighting some side project, be upfront with your employer, because a lot of the times they will support you. But my employer did support me. They said, take a 3-month leave of absence, go explore this opportunity. And if it falls through, then we'd love to have you back. We valued your work as a nurse here. But if it actually takes off, then, and you can go chase that dream in a way, then they were supporting me to go do that. So, supportive people around you, giving you confidence, and then, having a good plan, right? Having a good plan and rallying people. That's just kind of in the DNA of an entrepreneur. Some people can rally people around their idea, and some people struggle to do that. And I think that was one of my strong suits early on, especially, is trying to put a good plan together and then being genuine with people and trying to rally them around the idea.
So you mentioned something else, and I'm wondering if that's part of what you're describing, which is this these innovation programs. You went through 2 in 1 year. It sounds like they were sort of really critical to that sort of stepping outside and thinking differently. Was that part of the mentor contribution, or was it somewhere else? Were you just lucky to find the right mentors before that?
Yeah, no. Well, there was, in particular, there was a group, some local Arkansas-based groups called ESOs, Entrepreneurial Support Organizations, and they were the initial ones. And I'll call out a few in particular: Innovate Arkansas and Startup Junkie. A huge plug to those guys. They do incredible work helping small fledgling entrepreneurs with an idea on a napkin. But then they provide really dedicated, experienced, knowledgeable services for small businesses and entrepreneurs that have 10 employees, 100 employees, you name it. But they were the ones that kind of opened the door for me and said, here's a whole new world of entrepreneurship, and there's all these facets to it, and all these programs and resources available. And then, that kind of parlayed me into getting into those programs. And then once you're in the program, they are plugging you directly into, some programs will boast about a 50 or 150, mentor network of manufacturers, patent attorneys, fundraising attorneys, regulatory consultants, go down the list. And a lot of the times good programs will be industry specific. And one of the programs I did was specific to medical devices. So every bit of the content was fully applicable to me and my business. And I always say, and I've kind of coached, I've been the entrepreneur in residence for some of these programs the past couple of years. And, when you find yourself in that environment, I always just say, try to be a sponge and just soak everything up. Try to disagree with people as infrequently as you can. You don't have to agree with them. just soak it all in, right? You're just intaking as much information as you can. But yeah, those Arkansas-based groups are what got me initially linked into the mentor networks and kind of parlayed me into those business accelerator programs.
So that's fantastic. So for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and today I'm talking to Spencer Jones. He's the founder and CTO of Lineaus. We were just talking about his journey to this point, and I think it's important to understand. So you've got a couple of things in play at the moment. Tell us about those and what they are and, where you are in the process.
Sure. So our primary product right now is called SafeBreak Vascular. It is a patient safety device. I'll kind of give you the high level concept. So say you're pumping gas at a gas station and you forget to pull the hose out of your car. There's a breakaway valve.
People do, by the way. It's always surprising.
Yes, it happens. Yep, there's a breakaway valve on that hose. So if you drive off without taking it out, it just simply disconnects and keeps it keeps your car from getting messed up and keeps the fluid from spilling out, or the gas in this case. So we've made basically a similar product, but for IV lines. So think IV catheters when you go into the hospital and receive fluids. So our little 2-inch device goes in between the patient's IV access device on their arm and that long IV tubing from the pump. Most patients wouldn't even realize it's there. It's very low profile. Like I said, it's only 2 inches. But when there's a damaging level of force on the line, which is roughly about 4 pounds of tension, our device intentionally separates and seals both sides.
It's funny you mention that, because as I recall back, and there's a personal aspect to this, obviously from a physician standpoint. In the days when I was practicing clinically, I was, I'd be the IV team. Things have changed, and I think there's other folks that are focused on this. Of course, any time that happened, it was a frustration, because then I'd have to go. Clearly, it was for the patient, so it wasn't good for them. And I remember I had my own breakaway system, and I probably learned it from somebody else, but I put basically a U-shaped figure of 8 or whatever that was taped over, so that gave a little bit. And now it was imperfect, because if you kept going, it was going to run out. Here you are, you've taken that sort of principle, and it's not quite as simple as it sounds, at least as my understanding. It's not just, you put in a valve and hey, it will snap away. There's more to it. Tell us a little bit about that, because it's actually some really clever engineering behind this.
Yeah. And I'll say that was some nice resourcefulness with the figure eight J lift, as they'll call it. But no, it seems like it is a simple concept, right? I always tell people, we're not doing rocket science, but it's still a science, right? So it was very difficult to get the separation force to happen very uniformly, right? So if you had a 0-degree pull or a straight line pull, right? Some separation mechanisms really lent themselves to higher tension, but if you got off axis by a degree or two, it would drastically change the tension that it would separate at. For instance, your chapstick tube, right? The way you get your chapstick lid off, that's called an annular snap fit. We evaluated that, would not work. We ended up landing on a really cool design feature, and I'll just call out this one in particular. There's 4 arms inside of the device that essentially sit on ramps. And as the device gets pulled apart, all these arms kind of just bend inward. I know it's hard to visualize this, but just bear with me.
We'll put a picture of it on the blog post that goes.
Sure, absolutely. And the interesting thing about this mechanism is that the same arms that create the separation force when you pull the device apart, those are also the arms that prevent you from reconnecting the device, right? They form an interference with those very arm bars that they were sliding off previously during separation. And so that kind of, one component dual feature utility is something that's novel, and it's something that we protect in our intellectual property. But it was something that, like you said, was very difficult to get to. It took a lot of, they're called finite element analyses. It's an engineering model that's done on a computer just to see, how many millimeters of thickness does this particular arm need to be, right? So lots of hard engineering work went into it. And lucky enough, when I was rallying troops to help make this product a reality, I found some smart engineers. So they've, huge shout out to all of them that have helped us along the way.
And you bring up an interesting point. I mean, I don't know if it's obvious to people, but clearly one of the things you don't want to happen is, hey, just insert this back to, it's not a plug it back in kind of affair, because that would not be an appropriate outcome. But it does mean you can take that off and replace and put in the IV again it just requires a new device essentially, but also the recalibration, and people need to be aware. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The not being able to put the device back together, and kind of in that same train of thought, making sure that if an attempted reconnection was made, that it would protect the sterility of each of the tubings on the other side. Right. That was a huge requirement. We've done a lot of testing on that regulatory wise. But yeah, so once it does separate, can't go back together. And then those two ends of the device, in essence, serve as dead end caps or kind of just end caps that protect the IV tubing from the pump, respectively, as well as the extension tubing and needleless connector on the patient's IV access device. But yeah, that was a really important part. The FDA, I always say the FDA's, they're definitely worried about how you use the device correctly, but they're way more worried about how people will try and use it incorrectly.
Right.
And so we've done, a number of human factors tests where you run nurses through mock uses of the device and watch them with a magnifying glass and a fine tooth comb and watch how they, and it's, sometimes it's not them messing up. It's your education was unclear, right? Or your instructions for use were. So it's all just a process to make sure that, not only are we making sure appropriate use of the device is effective, but we're mitigating all the risks we can for the inappropriate use. And putting the device back together was probably one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, and not only do you not want it to go back together, but you also bring up another sort of point that's maybe obvious to others. But it's not. If you yank that thing out, sure, it bleeds a little, but that's the beauty of the body. It stops bleeding. Whereas if you leave an open tube out, it bleeds out. Yep. Of course, the pump's still emptying. So there's a whole additional aspect from a safety standpoint that you had to go through. If you think back, so this is it's just an extraordinary journey, and I'm just in awe sitting here of a nurse with this deep engineering technical experience. You've clearly sort of invested yourself in that. Think about the sort of insights that got, because I'm sure you didn't come up with that style or guide or however you've done it. What were the sort of steps? Were there things that you learned along the way that you think, wow, that was a big sort of inflection point? Or was it just this sort of smooth development and this naturally came out?
Oh, there were definitely, I'd say, breakthroughs in a way. Mm-hmm. And I'll frame them as not like a personal breakthrough as much as kind of our company's knowledge of this space had a breakthrough. When we were trying to figure out what the right pull force or what the right separation force for the device was, we spent a good amount of money and took pig belly skin and wrapped it around a PVC pipe and tested the market leading securement devices and pulled them off in slow motion cameras, watching the whole thing. And, frame by frame understood how catheters were being threatened when they were being pulled from different angles, right? That and the knowledge we gained from that was pretty paramount. I'd say one of the other things too that we learned was kind of in the manufacturing validation process, just different things about the ultrasonic welding of polycarbonates and how they react and what you can press them to do. That one was pretty big too. And then I'd say maybe the third one was around microbial ingress testing. That just, one of the reasons that FDA makes you do these tests is because you just learn so much about your own device. I'd say those kind of three, pillars, hurdles, or whatever you want to call them from an engineering and technical standpoint were big breakthroughs. But I've always thought the engineering side was incredibly interesting, and I think when you're a young startup founder, you really do have to become an expert in all the different areas of your business. I take pride and love getting on, microbiology calls or engineering calls or whatever. I just think it's interesting because, the better and more well-rounded you are, as just an employee, like this from an employee standpoint of my company, right? The more technically I know, the more questions I'll be able to answer, whether it's in a sales meeting, pitching a hospital, fundraising, you name it. I feel like it's always good to have that well-rounded knowledge. And, you can get very siloed in large companies, right? You kind of the opposite of that at a startup level. Everyone needs to know a lot about everything.
So as I try and tease out elements of that, I think, having a fascination or at least an open-mindedness to all of the aspects of what contributes is one of them. Mm-hmm. And then what I clearly heard was that the importance of gathering plenty of data at the beginning of the process versus jumping in. Am I getting that right? I want to be sure, because those are key elements, I think.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the getting that separation force right was probably one of the most critical design inputs that we had for the entire product, right? So you're absolutely right. And I think you could even say, and this is a story for another time, but there were things that we could have even taken more time on collecting data before we maybe bought an injection mold tool or something. But no, I think in one way, when the FDA puts out guidance documents, it tells you a lot of the times exactly what you need to do, right? So you can march down that path. And then part of the being creative and an entrepreneur is, you figure out kind of more unique ways that you need to test your device as you go. But you're absolutely right. The beginning phase for any startup, but especially a product-centric one, is just designing or gathering design inputs, doing customer discovery, talking to stakeholders, talking to users, and just constantly having to validate or invalidate your own assumptions about your product and the product offering that you have.
So we've only got a couple of minutes left. In the short time remaining, tell us where you are in the process and what's going to be happening.
Sure, absolutely. So we are currently under review with the FDA right now with our SafeBreak product. We are expecting clearance towards the end of the summer, but the COVID situation has caused a little bit of I'd say turmoil. FDA strapped for resources, sure. Right? So they're still being, not trying to throw any shade at all. I'm just commenting that they are strapped for resources.
That's well known, right?
Right, and they've already put out an extension for some companies that are under review. So there may be some upheaval there, but that's our biggest thing. We've got a big clinical trial plan. It's going to take place in Hartford, Connecticut. It's going to be a large randomized prospective clinical trial that we're excited about. And then as soon as we get that regulatory clearance, it's product launch. We've got our sales and distribution kind of as assembled as it can be right before you get that FDA clearance, and kind of just turnkey on that. And then launching the product. Behind that, we have a second product that we'll hopefully be submitting to the FDA in 2021 or 2022. It's a peripheral IV catheter, but it's a dual lumen peripheral IV catheter. So really excited about that product. We've done a lot of focus groups on that one and have a ton of really hot interest on it. So those are kind of two big things. Main thing is getting this regulatory clearance and then launching the product.
Fantastic. So not only have you got this exciting opportunity to prevent this, loss of that IV access, but you're solving that pincushion problem for patients, which is, well, wait, why not take it from here? It's, yep. Really, we don't do that. It's just, it's incredible. Well, unfortunately, as usual, we've run out of time. A true delight to, hear your journey, get some of the insights, and there's some just fantastic gems in there as to how to go about this process. Spencer, thanks for joining me today. It's been a real delight.
Dr. Nick, the pleasure was all mine. Happy to come back ever again if you'd like to have me. But thank you for the great questions, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, The Incrementalist, or share with me at DrNick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com. And tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.